The blood on Willa Vernon's hands had been scrubbed away 3 months ago, but she still saw crimson stains whenever she looked down at her palms. She stood at the edge of Paradise, New Mexico territory, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades that reminded her too much of that terrible day, and she wondered if she would ever stop seeing her sister's face in every shadow. The wagon had tipped because Willa had insisted on taking the shorter route. The rocks had been loose, the path treacherous, and when the wheel caught on that jutting stone, everything had happened so fast. Her younger sister Margot had been thrown clear, but not far enough. The wagon had rolled twice before crushing the life out of her 18-year-old body. Their parents had died of fever the year before, leaving just the two of them. And now, Willa was alone in the world with nothing but guilt eating her alive from the inside out. She had sold everything back in Missouri and come west because she could not bear to stay where everyone knew what had happened, where people whispered that poor Willa Vernon had killed her own sister through recklessness. Never mind that Margot had agreed to the shortcut, had been laughing and singing just moments before. Never mind that it had been an accident, pure and simple. Willa carried the weight of it like stones in her pockets, dragging her down deeper every day. Paradise was small but growing, one of those dusty frontier towns that seemed to spring up overnight wherever there was water and hope for something better. The main street stretched maybe 200 yards, lined with wooden buildings that still smelled of fresh pine and ambition. There was a general store, a saloon, a church being built at the far end, and a handful of other establishments that served the ranchers and drifters who passed through. Willa had taken a room above the general store, paying for 2 weeks in advance with money she could not really afford to spend. She worked at the store now, helping Mrs. Chen with inventory and customers. The work kept her hands busy, but did nothing for her mind, which circled endlessly back to that day, to every choice she had made that led to Margot's death. Sometimes late at night, she would wake up reaching for her sister, forgetting for one blessed moment that Margot was gone, and then remembering would be like dying all over again. It was on a Tuesday morning in late September of 1878, when Austin Jameson rode into Paradise with dust on his clothes and weariness in his bones. Willa was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the store when she first saw him, a tall man on a paint horse, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. Something about the set of his shoulders reminded her of her father, and she had to look away before the tears could start. He dismounted in front of the saloon across the street, tied his horse to the rail with practiced efficiency, and disappeared inside. Willa went back to sweeping, thinking nothing more about the stranger. Men came and went in Paradise all the time, most of them just passing through on their way to somewhere else. But Austin Jameson was not just passing through. By evening, word had spread that he had bought the old McCarty Ranch 5 miles outside of town, the one that had sat empty since old man McCarty had died without heirs. It was good land with a decent water source, and people speculated about what kind of operation this stranger planned to run. Cattle most likely, though some thought he might try horses given the quality of the paint he rode. Willa heard the gossip from Mrs. Chen, who heard everything that happened in Paradise, usually before it actually happened. The older woman had a network of information that would have impressed a telegraph operator, and she delighted in sharing every detail with Willa while they worked. Single man, too, Mrs. Chen said with a meaningful look. Around 30, I would guess. Not much of a talker, but polite. Paid for the ranch in cash, which means he is either very successful or very good at poker. That is none of our business, Willa said quietly. organizing canned goods on the shelf with more attention than the task required. "You are 23 years old and pretty as a picture when you are not frowning," Mrs. Chen said, not unkindly. "It would not hurt you to smile at a handsome man once in a while." Willa said nothing. The idea of smiling at anyone, let alone encouraging the attention of a man, felt like a betrayal of Margot. How could she even think about such things when her sister was dead because of her? How could she consider her own happiness when she had stolen all happiness from Margot forever? She saw Austin Jameson again 2 days later when he came into the store for supplies. He moved through the aisles with a list in hand, selecting items with the careful consideration of someone who knew exactly what he needed and had no money to waste on frivolities. Willa stood behind the counter, trying not to stare, but there was something about him that drew the eye. He was handsome in a weathered sort of way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His hands were scarred and calloused, working hands that had seen hard use. When he brought his selections to the counter, she began tallying the cost. Flour, coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition, lamp oil, and a few other necessities. He watched her work with those quiet eyes, and she felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see all the ugly guilt she carried inside. "You are new in town," she said, just to break the silence. "Arrived Tuesday," he confirmed. His voice was deep and pleasant, with a slight drawl that placed him somewhere further south. "Name is Austin Jameson. Bought the McCarty place." "Willa Vernon," she replied, writing down the total on a piece of brown paper. "That will be $8.40. He counted out the money from a worn leather wallet, and their fingers brushed briefly as he handed over the bills. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled back as if burned. If he noticed her reaction, he gave no sign. "Thank you, Miss Vernon," he said, gathering his purchases. "I expect I will be seeing you again." After he left, Mrs. Chen emerged from the back room with a knowing smile. "He could not take his eyes off you." "He was just looking," Willa protested. "There is nothing else in here to look at." "If you say so," Mrs. Chen said, but her smile did not fade. That night, Willa dreamed of the accident again. The wagon tipping, Margot's scream cut short, the terrible silence that followed. She woke with tears on her face and that familiar crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. In the darkness of her small room, she whispered the same words she whispered every night. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." But Margot could not hear her, and the guilt remained. The days fell into a rhythm. Willa worked at the store, served customers with quiet efficiency, and spent her evenings alone in her room, reading by lamplight until exhaustion finally dragged her into uneasy sleep. She sent money back to Missouri to pay for the upkeep of her parents and Margot's graves, even though it left her with barely enough to cover her own expenses. It was the least she could do. Austin Jameson came to the store regularly, always polite, always respectful. Sometimes he would linger at the counter after making his purchases, asking her opinion on various matters related to ranching in the territory. Should he focus on cattle or horses? What were the winters like? Were there problems with rustlers or hostile natives in the area? Willa answered his questions as best she could, though she knew little about ranching. What she did know, she had learned from listening to the other customers who came through the store. Austin seemed genuinely interested in her responses, even when she admitted her ignorance on certain subjects. "You are honest," he said one afternoon in October. "That is worth more than expertise sometimes." "Honesty is all I have left," she replied, and there must have been something in her tone because his expression shifted, became more intent. "That sounds like a story," he said carefully. "It is not one I care to tell." She busied herself rearranging items that did not need rearranging, hoping he would take the hint and leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, studying her with those perceptive eyes. I find that the stories we do not want to tell are usually the ones that need telling most. Maybe I am not ready to need that yet, Willa said, and finally looked up at him. Maybe I will never be ready. That is fair enough, Austin said, and to her relief he let the matter drop. But something had shifted between them in that moment, some acknowledgement of shared pain. She did not know what burdens he carried, but she recognized the weight of them in the set of his jaw, in the shadows that sometimes crossed his face when he thought no one was looking. 3 weeks after Austin Jameson arrived in Paradise, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the desert, turning the streets to mud and forcing everyone indoors. Willa was closing up the store when she saw a horse standing riderless in front of the saloon, reins trailing in the muck. She recognized the paint immediately as Austin's, and worry spiked through her before she could stop it. She should not care what happened to him. She should not care about anyone, because caring led to loss and loss led to the kind of pain she was already drowning in. But she found herself pulling on her cloak and splashing across the street anyway, telling herself it was simple human decency and nothing more. The saloon was crowded with men waiting out the storm, the air thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of wet wool. She spotted Austin immediately, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty whiskey glass in front of him. He was alone, staring at nothing, and something about the bleak expression on his face made her heart clench. She wove through the tables, ignoring the curious and sometimes leering looks from the other patrons. When she reached Austin, she touched his shoulder lightly. He looked up and for a moment did not seem to recognize her. Then clarity returned to his eyes and he straightened. "Miss Vernon, this is not really an appropriate place for a lady. Your horse is standing in the rain," she said. "I thought you should know." He was on his feet immediately, swaying slightly. Not drunk, she thought, but definitely not sober either. "I will take care of it, thank you." But when he took a step, he stumbled, and she had to catch his arm to steady him. He was heavier than he looked, all solid muscle, and the brief contact sent heat flooding through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "Let me help you," she said. "You should not," he replied, but there was no real conviction in his words. "People will talk. Let them talk. Your horse needs tending." Together they made their way outside into the driving rain. Austin's horse whinnied when it saw him, and he ran his hand along its neck with obvious affection. "I am sorry, friend, I got distracted." "Where is your ranch from here?" Willa asked, rain streaming down her face. 5 miles south, too far in this weather." He squinted up at the dark sky. "I will have to stay in town tonight." "The boarding house is full," Willa said, knowing it was true because Mrs. Chen had mentioned it that morning. A family of homesteaders had taken all the available rooms. "But there is a stable behind the store where you can shelter with your horse. It is dry at least." Austin looked at her for a long moment, rain plastering his dark hair to his skull. "You do not even know me. I know you take good care of your horse and you pay your bills on time. That is more than I can say for some." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "When you put it that way." The stable was small but well maintained, with 3 empty stalls and a loft full of hay. Willa lit a lantern while Austin led his horse inside, and began removing the saddle and tack with practiced movements. She found some old blankets in a trunk and spread them over a pile of hay in the corner, creating a makeshift bed. "You should get inside before you catch your death," Austin said, not looking at her as he worked. "I will be fine here." "I will bring you some food," Willa said. "You should not go to sleep on whiskey alone." She hurried back to the store before he could protest. let herself in through the back entrance, and put together a simple meal from the kitchen Mrs. Chen kept upstairs. Bread, cheese, some cold chicken left from dinner, and a jar of peaches. She added a pot of coffee and 2 cups without really thinking about why she needed 2. When she returned to the stable, Austin had finished with his horse and was sitting on the hay, head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and she saw exhaustion and something darker in his expression. "You did not have to do this," he said. "I know." She set the food down between them and poured coffee into both cups. "But it seemed like you could use some kindness tonight." They ate in silence for a while, the rain drumming on the roof above them, the lantern casting warm shadows on the walls. The food seemed to restore Austin somewhat, bringing color back to his face. When he had eaten his fill, he wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and stared into the dark liquid as if searching for answers there. "Today is the anniversary," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the rain. 3 years since I lost my wife and daughter." The words hit Willa like a physical blow. She had not expected such a confession, had not been prepared for the raw pain in his voice. "I am sorry. Cholera," he continued, as if he had not heard her, "swept through our town in Kansas in the span of 2 weeks. Sarah went first, and I could not even tend to her properly because I was trying to save Emma. Our daughter was only 5 years old. She kept asking for her mother, and I kept lying, telling her Sarah would be there soon. But Sarah was already dead, and Emma followed her 3 days later. I buried them both on a Tuesday morning, and then I burned everything we owned because I could not bear to look at it anymore." Willa's throat had closed up completely. She thought of Margot, of her own loss, and recognized the same devastation in Austin's story. "You could not have saved them. I was her husband, her father. I was supposed to protect them." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I was supposed to keep them safe, and I failed." "It was disease," Willa said, leaning forward. "You cannot fight disease with guns or strength or will. It takes what it wants and leaves the rest of us behind to wonder why. I know that up here." He tapped his temple. "But knowing it and believing it are 2 different things. I have spent 3 years trying to outrun the guilt, and it follows me everywhere I go. That is why I came here, why I bought the ranch. I thought maybe if I started over somewhere new, somewhere they had never been, I could finally breathe again. But it does not work that way, does it?" "No," Willa whispered. "It does not." Something in her tone made him focus on her more intently. "You understand, you have lost someone too." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "My sister, 3 months ago. She was 18 and she died because I made a mistake." The words came out before she could stop them, tumbling over each other in their rush to escape. "We were traveling together, just the 2 of us. Our parents were already dead, and we were all each other had left. I wanted to take a shortcut, and she trusted me. The wagon tipped on loose rocks, and she was thrown clear but not far enough. It rolled over her, and she died while I held her hand and promised her everything would be all right, which was just one more lie in a lifetime of lies." She was crying now, hot tears mixing with the rain water still on her face. "Everyone said it was an accident, that I should not blame myself, but how can I not? If I had taken the main road, if I had been more careful, if I had just listened to that small voice that said something was not right about that path, she would still be alive. Instead, she is in the ground back in Missouri, and I am here trying to outrun guilt that I do not deserve to be free of because she is dead and I am alive, and that is not fair. That is not right." Austin moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Willa, listen to me. You did not kill your sister. I might as well have." "No." His voice was firm now, cutting through her spiral of self-recrimination. "An accident killed your sister. Bad luck and bad timing and loose rocks, but not you. You were trying to get somewhere faster to make the journey easier. That is not a crime. That is not something you should carry for the rest of your life. But I do carry it, she said helplessly. Every day, every night. I see her face and I hear her scream and I wake up reaching for her only to remember that she is gone. How do I live with that? How do I keep going when part of me died with her in that desert? Austin was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had gentled. May I tell you something my mother said to me after Sarah and Emma died? She said that carrying guilt for things beyond our control is not loyalty or love. It is just another way of dying, slower and more painful. She said that the people we lose would not want us to bury ourselves along with them. They would want us to live, to find joy again, to honor their memory by choosing life instead of this half-existence in the shadows. How can I choose life when she does not have one? Because you can. Because you are still here, still breathing, and that matters. Your sister would not want you to suffer like this. Would she? Willa thought of Margot, bright and laughing and so full of life that she had seemed to glow from within. Margot, who had never held grudges, who forgave easily and loved fiercely. Margot, who had spent her last moments looking up at Willa with trust and confusion but not blame. No, she admitted. She would tell me to stop being foolish. Then maybe you should listen to her. It is not that simple. I know it is not. Austin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough, calloused from years of hard work. But maybe you do not have to carry this alone. Maybe you can let someone help shoulder the weight until you are strong enough to set it down. I do not deserve help. That is the guilt talking. That is not truth. They sat there in the hay with the rain falling and the lantern burning low, hands clasped, two broken people recognizing the same brokenness in each other. Willa felt something shift inside her chest, not healing exactly but a loosening of the tight bands that had made it so hard to breathe for months. I do not know how to let it go, she whispered. Neither do I, Austin admitted, but maybe we can figure it out together. The rain continued through the night, and they talked until the lantern burned out, sharing stories of the people they had lost and the lives they had lived before grief had reshaped them. Austin told her about Sarah's laugh and Emma's fascination with butterflies, about the house they had built together and the future they had planned. Willa told him about Margot's terrible singing voice and her gift for drawing, about their parents and the farm they had grown up on, and all the small moments that had seemed ordinary at the time but were precious beyond measure now. Somewhere in the darkness, with the sound of his horse shifting in its stall and the rain drumming overhead, Willa realized that she did not feel quite so alone anymore. The guilt was still there, heavy and familiar, but Austin was there too, and he understood in a way no one else had. When dawn finally came, pale and watery, they emerged from the stable to find paradise washed clean by the storm. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. Austin looked at her in the growing light, and something in his expression made her heart skip. Thank you, he said, for last night. For listening, for understanding. Thank you for the same, she replied. May I call on you? The question came out a bit rushed, as if he was afraid of her answer. Properly, I mean, not just at the store, but actually call on you. Willa knew she should say no. She should protect what was left of her heart, should not risk caring about someone else when loss had already devastated her once. But looking at Austin Jameson in the morning light, seeing the hope and fear warring in his eyes, she found herself nodding. I would like that. His smile, when it came, was like sunrise after a long night. Word spread quickly through paradise that Austin Jameson was courting Willa Vernon, and opinions were divided. Some thought it was too soon for both of them, that they were just two damaged people clinging to each other out of shared pain. Others saw how gently Austin treated her, how Willa's eyes had begun to lose some of their haunted quality, and thought perhaps they might be good for each other. Mrs. Chen was firmly in the second camp. "You are smiling again," she observed one morning as Willa arranged a display of canned goods. "It is good to see." "I am not sure I have the right to smile," Willa said, but there was less conviction in her words than there would have been a few weeks earlier. "The right to smile, the right to be happy, the right to live your life even though your sister cannot live hers." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "You young people make everything so complicated. Your sister loved you, yes, more than anything. Then she would want you to be happy. She would want you to find love and joy and all the good things this world has to offer. Thinking otherwise is just pride dressed up as grief." The words stung because they carried truth, and Willa was still turning them over in her mind when Austin arrived that afternoon to take her on a ride. It was Sunday, her one day off from the store, and he had promised to show her the ranch. They rode out together under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, following a well-worn trail that wound through the desert landscape. Austin's ranch was prettier than Willa had expected, with good grazing land and a creek that ran year-round. The house was small but sturdy, built from adobe with a wide porch that caught the afternoon shade. "I have been fixing it up," Austin said as they dismounted. The roof was in bad shape, and some of the windows needed replacing, but it is coming along. Inside, the house was sparse but clean, furnished with only the essentials. Willa could see evidence of his work everywhere, in the freshly plastered walls and the new shutters on the windows. It was the house of a man making a fresh start, unburdened by memories of what had come before. "It is nice," she said honestly. "It feels peaceful. That is what drew me to it. After everything that happened in Kansas, I needed peace more than I needed anything else." He looked around the main room, and Willa tried to see it through his eyes. "I thought maybe if I could build something new, something that was just mine and untouched by the past, I could finally move forward. But a house is just walls and a roof without people to make it a home." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Willa felt her pulse quicken, felt the old fear rise up to choke her. What if she let herself care and something happened to him? What if she opened her heart again only to have it shattered? What if her presence brought bad luck, drew disaster the way her choice of road had killed Margot? Austin must have seen the panic in her face because he moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "We do not have to rush anything. I just wanted you to see this place, to understand what I am trying to build here. Whether you want to be part of that or not, the choice is yours, and I will respect whatever you decide." "I am afraid," Willa admitted. "I am afraid that if I let myself care about you, something terrible will happen. That I will lose you the way I lost her, and it will be my fault somehow." "I am afraid too," Austin said. "I am terrified actually. After Sarah and Emma, I swore I would never love anyone again because the pain of losing them nearly destroyed me. But then you walked across the street in the rain to tell me about my horse, and you brought me food and listened to me talk about the worst day of my life, and you understood in a way no one else could. You are the first person who has made me think that maybe there could be a future beyond just surviving. What if I cannot be what you need? You already are. You just have to believe you deserve to be." They stood there in the empty house while the afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. Willa felt the weight of her guilt pressing down as it always did, but Austin was there too, solid and real, offering to help carry what she could not bear alone. "I do not know how to do this," she whispered. "I do not know how to let go of what happened." "Then do not let go. Not yet. Austin's hands moved from her shoulders to cradle her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. Just hold on to it a little less tightly. Just let me stand beside you and share the weight. You do not have to carry it alone anymore, Willa. That is what I am trying to tell you. Let me carry it with you. Something broke open inside her at his words, some dam that had been holding back a flood of grief and guilt and fear. She found herself sobbing against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. All the pain she had been holding inside for 3 months came pouring out, and Austin did not flinch or pull away. He just stood there and let her cry, let her break apart in his arms with the trust that he would help put her back together. When the storm finally passed, Willa felt wrung out but lighter somehow, as if the tears had washed away some of the weight she had been carrying. She pulled back to look at Austin and found his eyes suspiciously bright as well. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that. Do not apologize for being human. Do not apologize for grieving someone you loved." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and intimate. "That is what I am here for. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am here." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care so much about someone as broken as me?" "Because I am broken too, and maybe our pieces fit together. Because when I look at you, I see someone who is fighting every day to keep going despite the pain, and that takes a courage most people will never understand. Because you make me want to try again, to build something good and lasting and true. And because even though we have only known each other for a few weeks, I think I am falling in love with you, and that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure." Willa's breath caught in her throat. "Austin, you do not have to say anything back. I am not asking for promises or declarations. I just wanted you to know where my heart is, so there are no secrets between us." But Willa found that she did want to say something back, found that the words were there waiting to be spoken. "I think I am falling in love with you too, and you are right, it is terrifying. But it is also the first thing that has felt right since Margot died. When I am with you, the guilt is still there, but it does not feel quite so overwhelming. You make me think that maybe, someday, I might be able to forgive myself. Then we will work towards someday together." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and careful, as if she was something precious that might break under rough handling. Willa kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, feeling something warm and hopeful unfurl in her chest. It was not healing, not yet, but it was the beginning of healing, and that was more than she had allowed herself to hope for in a long time. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the ranch, talking about everything and nothing. Austin showed her around the property, pointing out where he planned to build a barn and fences for cattle. Willa found herself caught up in his vision, imagining what the place could become with time and effort. For the first time since the accident, she let herself think about a future that extended beyond the next day or week. As the sun began to set and they prepared to ride back to town, Austin caught her hand and held it tight. "Thank you for giving me a chance, for giving us a chance. Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding, always." The ride back to paradise was peaceful, the desert beautiful in the fading light. When they reached the town, Austin helped her dismount in front of the general store, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "May I see you again soon?" he asked. "You had better," Willa replied, surprising herself with the lightness in her tone. "Otherwise I will think you just wanted to show off your ranch." Austin's laugh was warm and genuine, and it made her smile in response. As she watched him ride away, Willa touched her fingers to her lips, remembering the kiss, and wondered at how quickly her world had shifted. The guilt was still there, probably would always be there to some degree, but it had company now. Alongside the pain, there was hope. The weeks that followed were the happiest Willa could remember since before the accident. Austin called on her regularly, and they fell into an easy pattern of spending time together whenever her work allowed. Sometimes they would have dinner at the small restaurant in town, sitting across from each other and talking until the owner started giving them pointed looks about closing time. Other times, Austin would take her riding, showing her the beauty of the territory she had barely noticed in her grief. He never pushed her to move faster than she was ready for, never demanded more than she could give. When the guilt overwhelmed her, as it still sometimes did, he would listen and remind her gently that carrying blame for an accident did not honor her sister's memory. When the nightmares woke her, and she came to work hollow-eyed and exhausted, he would bring her coffee and sit with her in companionable silence until she felt steady again. Slowly, painfully, Willa began to believe that maybe she did deserve a second chance at happiness. Maybe Margot would not want her to spend the rest of her life punishing herself for something that had been beyond her control. Maybe loving Austin and letting him love her back was not a betrayal but a way of choosing life, of refusing to let the accident steal any more from her than it already had. It was in November, 2 months after that rain-soaked night in the stable, that Austin asked her to marry him. They were at the ranch, sitting on the porch and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool but not yet cold, and Willa had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She felt peaceful in a way she had not thought possible anymore. "I have been thinking," Austin said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want it to look like?" Willa asked, tilting her head to look at him. "I want it to look like this. You and me, sitting on this porch watching the stars. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, raise cattle and maybe children if we are blessed with them. I want to carry your burdens and let you carry mine, and I want to do all of it here in paradise with you as my wife." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know we are both still healing from terrible losses. But I also know that I love you, Willa Vernon, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone again. You have brought light back into a world that had gone dark for me. You have given me a reason to keep going, to build something instead of just existing. Will you marry me?" Willa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw herself into his arms and accept this gift of love and partnership he was offering. But another part, the part that still carried guilt like a stone, hesitated. "I am afraid," she said honestly. "I am afraid that I do not deserve this, that I do not deserve you. How can I say yes to happiness when Margot will never have the chance to find her own?" Austin squeezed her hands gently. "Can I tell you what I think Margot would say if she were here?" Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. "I think she would tell you to stop being a fool and marry the man who loves you. I think she would say that your happiness does not diminish her memory, that loving me does not mean you loved her any less. I think she would want you to build a life full of joy and love, and all the things she did not get the chance to have. The best way to honor her is to live, Willa. Really live, not just survive." Tears were streaming down Willa's face, but these were different from the tears she had shed so many times before. These were tears of release, of letting go, of finally allowing herself to believe that she could have a future. "She would have liked you," Willa said, her voice breaking. "She would have approved. Is that a yes?" "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Austin pulled her into his arms and they held each other under the stars, two people who had been broken by loss finding wholeness in each other. When he kissed her, it tasted like promise, like a future unfolding, like all the good things she had thought were lost forever. They were married 3 weeks later in the church that had finally been completed at the end of Paradise's Main Street. It was a small ceremony, attended by Mrs. Chen and the other townspeople who had become friends over the past months. Willa wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, and Austin wore his best clothes, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. As they stood before the minister and exchanged vows, Willa felt Margot's presence with her, not heavy with accusation but light with blessing. She imagined her sister smiling, happy that Willa had found love, and for the first time since the accident, the thought of Margot brought more joy than pain. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Austin kissed her, Willa felt the last chains of guilt begin to loosen. She was not free of it entirely, might never be completely free, but she was no longer drowning under its weight. Austin had helped her carry it until she was strong enough to set it down, and now they would carry each other through whatever came next. The reception was held at the saloon, which had been decorated with wildflowers and bunting for the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and the warm wishes of people who had watched them fall in love. Mrs. Chen gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure, talking about how she had known from the first moment she saw them together that they were meant for each other. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Austin pulled Willa aside to a quiet corner. "How are you feeling?" he asked, searching her face. "Happy," she said, and meant it. "Scared still, but happy. Like maybe I am allowed to be happy again. You are allowed, you have always been allowed, you just needed to believe it. Thank you for being patient with me. For not giving up when I was trying so hard to push you away. I could never give up on you. You are worth fighting for, worth waiting for. And now you are my wife, and I am the luckiest man in the territory." They danced together as the night deepened, moving slowly to music played on a battered fiddle by one of the local ranchers. Willa rested her head on Austin's shoulder and let herself simply be in the moment, not thinking about the past or worrying about the future. Just present, just here, just happy. When the party finally wound down and they made their way to the ranch that was now their home, Willa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, beside this man who had helped her find her way out of the darkness. The guilt would always be part of her story, but it was not the whole story anymore. There was room now for love and hope and all the bright possibilities of tomorrow. Life at the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Willa discovered that she enjoyed the physical work of ranching, finding satisfaction in caring for the small herd of cattle Austin had purchased, and the chickens she insisted on getting for eggs. The days were long and sometimes difficult, but they were good days, filled with purpose and partnership. Austin was a thoughtful husband, attentive without being smothering, strong without being overbearing. He had his own moments of grief, times when the anniversary of a memory would hit him unexpectedly, and he would grow quiet and withdrawn. When that happened, Willa would sit with him the way he had sat with her, offering silent support until he was ready to talk. They learned each other's wounds and how to tend them with care. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk about their days, making plans for the ranch and their future. Austin wanted to expand the herd, maybe try his hand at breeding horses as well. Willa wanted to start a garden, to grow vegetables and flowers that would make the ranch feel more like a home. Together they painted a picture of what their life could become, and with each passing day, that picture grew clearer and more real. Winter came to Paradise, brief but intense, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that transformed the desert into something strange and beautiful. They spent those short, dark days working together to keep the animals fed and safe, then retreating to the warmth of their house, where a fire always crackled in the hearth. It was during those long winter nights that Willa told Austin stories about her childhood, about her parents and Margot and the life they had lived before loss had redefined everything. What was Margot like? Austin asked one evening as they lay in bed, wrapped in quilts against the cold. Willa smiled in the darkness. She was sunshine. That is the best way I can describe her. She made everything brighter just by being present. She could never hold a tune, but she sang constantly anyway. She drew these beautiful sketches of birds and flowers and anything that caught her attention. She was impulsive and sometimes reckless, but she loved with her whole heart. She sounds wonderful. She was. She would have driven you crazy within a day, but you would have loved her anyway because everyone did. Willa paused, feeling the familiar ache of loss but finding it bearable now. I used to think that remembering her would always hurt this much, that I could never think about her without wanting to die from the pain of it. But lately, the memories make me smile more than they make me cry. Is that wrong? No, Austin said firmly, pulling her closer. That is exactly right. That is healing. I miss her still. I will always miss her, but I am grateful too for the time we had together, for all the memories I carry. She will always be part of me, but she does not have to be the only part anymore. She would be proud of you. Of how strong you have been, how you kept going even when it seemed impossible. I could not have done it without you. You saved me, Austin. You reached into that darkness I was drowning in and pulled me out. We saved each other, he corrected gently. I was just as lost as you were, just better at hiding it. You gave me a reason to start living again instead of just going through the motions. We found each other at exactly the right time. Spring arrived in an explosion of wildflowers and new life. The desert, which had seemed barren and harsh during winter, revealed itself as a place of unexpected beauty. Willa spent hours in her garden, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the soil, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing growing things. The physical work helped quiet her mind, and the garden became a place where she could commune with her memories of Margot without being overwhelmed by grief. It was in late April that Willa realized she was pregnant. The signs had been there for a few weeks, but she had been afraid to acknowledge them, afraid to hope for something that could be taken away. When she finally gathered the courage to tell Austin, they were in the barn doing the evening chores. She watched him fork hay into the stalls, admiring the easy strength in his movements, and blurted it out before she could lose her nerve. I think I am with child. Austin dropped the pitchfork and turned to stare at her, his expression cycling through shock, joy, and fear in rapid succession. Are you sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed 2 courses, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. And there is something different, something I can feel even if I cannot quite explain it. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Willa asked, even though she could see that he was. I know this is sudden, and I know it must bring up memories of Emma. Austin pulled back to look at her, framing her face with his hands. I am terrified and overjoyed and grateful all at once. Yes, I think about Emma, about how I could not protect her. But I also believe that we are being given a gift, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of what we lost. This child is a blessing, Willa. A sign that life goes on, that joy can follow sorrow. I am afraid too, she admitted. Afraid that something will go wrong, that I will fail this child the way I feel like I failed Margot. You did not fail Margot, Austin said with the patience of someone who had said these words many times before and would say them many more. And you will not fail our child. You will be a wonderful mother because you know how precious life is, how quickly it can be lost. You will cherish every moment because you understand that nothing is guaranteed. They held each other in the barn while the horses shifted in their stalls and the sun set outside, painting the sky in brilliant shades. Willa let herself feel the joy she had been holding at bay. Let herself imagine a future with a child who had Austin's eyes and perhaps her smile. It felt like a miracle, like an unexpected grace, like proof that second chances were real. The pregnancy progressed without complication. Willa continued to work around the ranch, though Austin fussed over her constantly, trying to prevent her from doing anything too strenuous. She found his concern endearing even when it was excessive, understanding that it came from a place of love and loss. As her belly grew round with their child, Willa found that she thought less about the accident that had killed Margot and more about the life that was coming. It felt like a shift in focus, from past to future, from death to life. The guilt was still there, but it had changed somehow, transformed from a crushing weight into a tender scar, still visible but no longer painful to touch. In June, when the heat was becoming oppressive and Willa's patience was wearing thin with the discomfort of late pregnancy, they made a trip into town for supplies. As they walked down the main street, Willa saw a woman she recognized from the store standing with a young girl who could not have been more than 16 or 17. The woman was Mrs. Patterson, and the girl was her daughter Sophie. "Mrs. Jameson," Mrs. Patterson called out when she spotted them. "How lovely to see you. You are positively glowing." They exchanged pleasantries while Austin went into the store to speak with Mrs. Chen about their order. Sophie Patterson stood quietly beside her mother, her eyes downcast, and something about her posture made Willa take notice. There was a defeated quality to the way she held herself, a weariness that seemed far too familiar. After Mrs. Patterson excused herself to continue her errands, Willa found herself following an impulse and approaching Sophie. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. Sophie looked up, surprise flickering across her young face. "I am fine, madam, just tired." "You look like you are carrying something heavy," Willa said, and watched Sophie's eyes fill with tears. "I made a mistake," Sophie whispered. "My best friend Catherine was thrown from a horse last month and broke her back. The doctor said it was because we were racing, and I was the one who suggested we race. Her parents will not let me see her anymore, and everyone in town talks about how it was my fault. I just wanted to have fun, but now Catherine might never walk again, and it is all because of me." Willa's heart clenched with recognition. She saw herself in this young woman, saw the guilt and self-recrimination that she knew too well. Without thinking, she reached out and took Sophie's hand. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "What happened to your friend was an accident. A terrible, tragic accident, but an accident nonetheless. You did not push her off that horse. You did not cause her to fall. You suggested a race because you are young and it seemed like fun, and there is no crime in that. Sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason at all, and carrying the blame for it will not change what happened. It will only destroy you from the inside out. But if I had not suggested the race, then maybe something else would have happened at some other time. Or maybe nothing would have happened and you would both be fine. We cannot know. We cannot go back and change our choices, no matter how much we wish we could. All we can do is learn to forgive ourselves for being imperfect, for making choices based on the information we had at the time, for being human." Sophie was crying openly now, and Willa pulled her into a gentle embrace, feeling the girl shake with sobs. Over Sophie's shoulder, she saw Austin emerge from the store and take in the scene. He met her eyes and she saw understanding and pride in his gaze. When Sophie finally pulled away, she wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "How do you do it? How do you learn to forgive yourself?" "You take it one day at a time. You let people who care about you help carry the weight until you are strong enough to set it down. You choose to live and to find joy again, even when it feels like a betrayal. You honor the person who was hurt by refusing to waste the life you have been given. It is not easy, and some days are harder than others, but it is possible. I promise you it is possible. Did something happen to you too? Sophie asked with the blunt curiosity of youth. My sister died in an accident that I blamed myself for. I carried that guilt for months, let it poison everything good in my life. But someone helped me see that punishing myself was not the answer. Someone showed me that I could choose differently. She reached out and squeezed Sophie's hand. I am telling you this because I do not want you to make the same mistakes I did. Talk to your friend if her parents will allow it. Apologize if you need to, but do not accept blame for something that was beyond your control. And whatever you do, do not let this define the rest of your life. Sophie nodded, looking young and vulnerable but also slightly less burdened. Thank you, Mrs. Jameson. Thank you for understanding. After Sophie left, Austin came to stand beside Willa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. That was a good thing you just did. I saw myself in her. I could not just walk away. A few months ago, you were where she is now. Look how far you have come. Willa leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I had help. I had you. And now you are helping someone else. That is how it works. We heal and then we help others heal. The gift gets passed forward. Their son was born on a hot August night after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Willa had been convinced she would die, or the baby would die, or both of them would die. And with each contraction, she prayed to Margot and to her mother for strength to survive this ordeal. But as dawn broke over the desert and the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, alive and healthy and perfect, Willa felt a surge of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. Austin was there beside her, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their son. He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I cannot believe we made something so perfect. They named him Thomas, after Austin's father, and gave him the middle name Marcus to honor Margot. When Willa held him against her chest and felt his tiny heart beating next to hers, she understood with perfect clarity that this was what moving forward looked like. Not forgetting the past or pretending it had not happened, but making space for new life alongside the old grief. Do you think Margot would have liked him? She asked Austin during one of those hazy first days when everything was reduced to feeding and sleeping and marveling at their baby. I think she would have been his favorite aunt, Austin replied. I think she would have spoiled him rotten and taught him all the things you specifically told her not to teach him. Willa laughed, imagining it. She would have drawn him pictures and sung him off key lullabies and been completely impossible and wonderful. Tell him about her when he is older. Tell him about his Aunt Margot and his sister Emma, and everyone we have loved and lost. They should be part of his story too. I will, Willa promised, looking down at Thomas's sleeping face. And I will tell him that even though terrible things happen, and people we love are taken from us too soon, there is still beauty in the world. There is still love and hope, and the possibility of happiness. Thomas grew quickly, a healthy and happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Willa proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, though she often second-guessed herself and worried that she was doing everything wrong. Austin was there to reassure her, to remind her that perfection was not the goal and that their son would thrive as long as he was loved. The ranch prospered too. Austin's hard work paid off as the cattle herd grew, and they began to earn a reputation for quality stock. Other ranchers would come by to look at their animals and ask Austin's advice on various matters. He was generous with his knowledge, always willing to help a neighbor, and this built goodwill throughout the area. Willa's garden expanded until it provided most of their vegetables and herbs. She also started raising more chickens and even some pigs, creating a diverse operation that made them increasingly self-sufficient. On market days in town, she would sell eggs and vegetables, and the money she earned went into savings for Thomas's future. Life was not perfect. There were still hard days when memories would surface unexpectedly, and the old grief would rear its head. Sometimes Willa would wake from nightmares about the accident, reaching instinctively for Margot before remembering. Sometimes Austin would grow quiet on the anniversaries of his losses, needing space to mourn what he had lost before he could fully embrace what he had found. But they weathered those storms together, holding each other through the pain, reminding each other that healing was not linear and that setbacks did not erase progress. They had learned to be gentle with themselves and with each other, to allow for grief without being consumed by it. When Thomas was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more joy, a confidence born from having survived the first pregnancy and delivery. Their daughter was born in March of 1881, and they named her Sarah Margot, honoring both of the people they had lost. "Do you think we are allowed to be this happy?" Willa asked Austin one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was chasing chickens while baby Sarah dozed in her cradle beside them. "I think we have earned it," Austin replied. "We have paid our dues in suffering. We have learned our lessons about loss and grief and the fragility of life. Now we get to reap the rewards of having survived all of that. We get to be happy because we know how rare and precious happiness is. I still think about her, about Margot. Probably every day. I still think about Sarah and Emma too, but it does not hurt the way it used to. Now when I remember them, I feel grateful for the time we had together instead of just sad about what was lost. That is growth, Willa. That is healing. Do you think they would be proud of us? Of what we have built here? I know they would. I think they are watching from wherever souls go after this life, and they are happy for us. They would not want us to have sacrificed our futures on the altar of guilt. They would want exactly what we have now: love and family and a good life well lived." Thomas came running up to the porch then, grass-stained and grinning, demanding that his father come see something very important right now. Austin rose with a laugh and let himself be dragged away, leaving Willa with their sleeping daughter, and the last light of day painting the sky in colors that no longer reminded her of blood. She thought about that night in the stable years ago when Austin had found her sobbing and offered to carry her burden. She thought about how she had believed she could never be happy again, never deserve peace or love or any good thing. How wrong she had been. How close she had come to throwing away this beautiful life because she could not forgive herself for being human. The guilt was still there, would probably always be a part of her, but it had transformed into something softer. A reminder rather than a punishment. A scar that she could touch without flinching. She had learned to carry it differently, to accept that she could hold both sorrow for what was lost and gratitude for what remained. They were not mutually exclusive. She could mourn Margot while celebrating her own life. She could remember the accident while refusing to let it define her forever. Sarah stirred in her cradle, making the small noises that indicated she would wake soon and need feeding. Willa lifted her daughter into her arms and settled into the rocking chair, opening her bodice to nurse. As the baby latched on and began to eat with greedy enthusiasm, Willa stroked her dark hair and marveled at the miracle of her existence. "Your name honors two very special people," she murmured. "Your big sister Emma, who I never got to meet, and your Aunt Margot, who was the best sister anyone could ask for. They would have loved you so much. They would have filled your life with joy and laughter and all the good things. I will tell you all about them when you are older. I will make sure you know where you came from and what we survived to get here. Years passed in the way that years do, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of children. Thomas became a serious boy who loved animals and wanted to know how everything worked. Sarah was wild and imaginative, always getting into some sort of mischief, and Willa saw echoes of Margot in her daughter's reckless joy. They had a third child when Sarah was 3, another boy they named Daniel, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Austin proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, developing a reputation that extended beyond Paradise to other parts of the territory. They were able to hire help during busy seasons, paying fair wages to the cowboys who came through looking for work. Willa's garden became famous locally, and she started preserving her surplus to sell in town, adding to their growing savings. Paradise itself evolved over those years, transforming from a rough frontier town into a proper community. More families arrived, drawn by tales of good land and opportunity. The church expanded, a school was built, and eventually a proper doctor set up practice, which gave everyone peace of mind. Willa became involved in the community, helping new arrivals get settled and organizing social events that brought people together. She stayed in touch with Sophie Patterson, who had taken Willa's advice to heart and learned to forgive herself for her friend's accident. Sophie eventually became a teacher at the new school, finding purpose in educating the next generation. Whenever they saw each other, there was a special understanding between them, a bond forged by shared experience with guilt and grace. On Thomas's 10th birthday, Willa took him to the spot where she had scattered Margot's few possessions years earlier. It was a rise overlooking the ranch with a view that stretched for miles across the desert. She had not been back since shortly after her wedding, but it felt right to bring her son here now, to tell him the story of his aunt and help him understand his family's history. "Your Aunt Margot died when she was only 18, Willa began, settling onto the ground with Thomas beside her. "We were traveling together and there was an accident. The wagon we were in tipped over and she was thrown out. She died almost immediately." Thomas looked at her with wide eyes, processing this information. "Were you hurt too?" "Not physically. But inside I was very hurt. I blamed myself for what happened because I had chosen the road we were on. I thought that if I had made a different choice, she would still be alive. That guilt nearly destroyed me." "But it was not your fault," Thomas said with the certainty of youth. "Accidents just happen sometimes." "I know that now, but it took me a long time to learn it. I was drowning in guilt and grief, and I could not see any way forward. But then I met your father, and he helped me understand that I did not have to carry that burden alone. He taught me that punishing myself would not bring Margot back, that the best way to honor her was to live my life fully and find joy again. I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too. She would have loved you very much. She would have taught you to draw and told you stories, and probably encouraged you to do things I specifically said not to do." Willa smiled at the thought. "But even though she is not here, she is still part of our family. Her memory lives on in the stories I tell and the way we choose to live our lives. You still miss her, every day, but it does not hurt the way it used to. Now when I think about her, I remember all the good times we had together. I remember her laugh and her terrible singing, and the way she could find beauty in the smallest things. The pain has faded, but the love remains." They sat together on that rise for a long time, mother and son, looking out over the land that had become their home. Willa told Thomas stories about Margot, about their childhood and their parents and all the memories she carried. And in the telling, she felt the last remnants of guilt finally release their hold, replaced by simple gratitude for the time they had shared. When they returned to the ranch, Austin was waiting on the porch with Sarah and Daniel. He took one look at Willa's face and smiled, understanding without words what had transpired. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together in the parlor and talked about their journey. "Do you remember that night in the stable?" Willa asked. "When you told me you could help me carry what I could not bear alone?" "I remember every moment of that night. I did not believe you then. I thought the guilt would crush me eventually, that I would never be free of it. But you were right. Sharing the burden made it bearable, and eventually I was strong enough to set it down. You saved my life, Austin. You gave me back my future." "We saved each other," he said, just as he had said years before. "I was as lost as you were, just better at hiding it. We found each other at exactly the right time, and we built something beautiful from the wreckage of our losses. That is not just my doing or your doing. That is us doing it together." "I love you," Willa said simply. "I love the life we have built, the family we have created, the future that stretches out ahead of us. Thank you for not giving up on me when I could not see past my own pain. I will never give up on you. That is what the vows meant. For better or worse, in joy and sorrow, through all the days of our lives. I meant every word." They held each other in the quiet house while their children dreamed in their beds, and the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket. Willa thought about all the years that had passed since that terrible day when Margot died, about all the growth and healing and transformation that had occurred. She was not the same woman who had arrived in paradise carrying guilt she did not deserve. She had learned to forgive herself, to accept that being human meant making mistakes, and that tragedy was not always someone's fault. More than that, she had learned that love could flourish even in soil fertilized by grief. That second chances were real and precious. That choosing life and joy and hope was not a betrayal of those who had died but a tribute to them. Margot would have wanted her to be happy. Sarah and Emma would have wanted Austin to find love again. Honoring their memories meant living fully, embracing every moment, and passing forward the gift of grace that they had received. The years continued to unfold in their steady progression. The children grew into capable young adults who knew their own worth and understood the value of hard work. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Austin's body began to show the wear of decades of hard labor. Sarah developed her mother's gift for growing things and expanded the garden into a proper market operation. Daniel surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and took over the business side of the ranch, making sure they got fair prices for their stock and invested their profits wisely. Willa and Austin grew old together the way they had always hoped they would, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining strong. They sat on the porch in the evenings and told stories about the early days, about meeting during that thunderstorm and falling in love despite their broken hearts. They talked about Margot and Sarah and Emma, keeping those memories alive for their children and eventually their grandchildren. On the morning of their 30th wedding anniversary, Willa woke before dawn and slipped out of bed without waking Austin. She walked to the rise where she had scattered Margot's things so many years ago and sat watching the sun come up over the desert. The land was beautiful in the early light, painted in shades of gold and amber, and she felt a profound sense of peace. "I did it," she whispered to the wind, to Margot's memory, to the universe at large. "I built a good life. I found love and happiness and purpose. I honored your memory by choosing to live instead of just existing. I hope wherever you are, you can see how it all turned out. I hope you know that I never forgot you, that I carried you with me through every milestone and achievement. You are part of everything good in my life because you taught me how to love, how to laugh, how to find joy in simple things. Thank you for being my sister. Thank you for all the years we had together, and thank you for setting me free to find my own path forward." The wind rustled through the sparse vegetation, and Willa chose to interpret it as Margot's response, a final blessing from beyond the veil. She sat there until the sun was fully above the horizon, then stood and walked back to the ranch, back to Austin and their life together. He was awake when she returned, standing on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "I wondered where you had gone. Just saying good morning to an old friend. Margot." Austin handed her one of the cups and wrapped his free arm around her shoulders. "What did you tell her?" "That we did all right. That despite everything that tried to break us, we built something lasting and true. That I finally learned to forgive myself and found happiness again. That I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, which I would not have thought possible but turns out to be true." "I love you too," Austin said, kissing the top of her head. "More than words can express. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa Jameson. You brought me back to life when I thought I was done living." They stood there together as the day began, 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. The guilt that had once threatened to destroy them had been transformed into wisdom, the grief had softened into gentle memory, and the love they shared had only grown stronger with time. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch that evening to celebrate the anniversary. There was food and music and laughter, the house full of life and love. Willa looked around at all the faces, at the family she and Austin had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she had nearly thrown away in her grief. This was what she almost missed because she could not forgive herself for being human. As the party wound down and people began heading home, Thomas pulled his mother aside. "You seem especially happy today." "I am happy every day now, but yes, today feels special. Your father and I have been through so much together, survived things that might have broken other people. 30 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, a successful ranch, a good life in a community we love. That is worth celebrating." "You have always been strong," Thomas said. "Even when we were little and did not understand why sometimes you would get sad, we knew you were strong. You taught us that it is okay to hurt, okay to grieve, but that we do not have to let pain define us. I learned that from your father. He taught me that carrying guilt for things beyond our control is just another form of dying. He taught me to let go, to forgive myself, to choose life. Everything good that came after started with that choice." Late that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Willa and Austin lay in bed together, comfortable in the darkness and each other's presence. They did not need words anymore after 30 years. They could communicate in touches and sighs, in the rhythm of breathing synchronized by decades of sleeping side by side. But tonight Willa felt the need to speak, to articulate what was in her heart. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the stable? When I told you about Margot and how I could not forgive myself? I remember. I said, let me carry that for you. Let me help you bear the weight until you are strong enough to set it down. You kept that promise. For months, for years, you carried what I could not bear alone. You never complained, never told me to get over it or move on. You just stood beside me and helped me find my way back to myself. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that. You did not need to thank me. That is what love means. We carry each other's burdens. We stand together through the storms. We give each other the grace to be imperfect and broken and still worthy of happiness. I am glad I let you help me. I am glad I did not push you away like I tried to do at first. I am glad I said yes when you asked me to marry you, even though I was terrified and felt undeserving. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Austin corrected with a smile she could hear even in the darkness. "The best decision was choosing to keep living, to not let the guilt destroy you." Everything else followed from that. They fell asleep holding hands, the way they had almost every night for 30 years. Two people who had learned that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that grace was real, that second chances were possible if you were brave enough to reach for them. Willa dreamed of Margot that night, but it was not one of the nightmares that had haunted her for so long. In this dream, her sister was young and healthy and glowing with joy. She took Willa's hands and smiled. "I am so proud of you," Margot said. "Look at everything you built. Look at the life you created. This is what I wanted for you. This is why I am so glad you finally let go of that guilt." "I miss you," Willa said. "I will always miss you." "I miss you too, but I am okay. I am at peace. And I am so happy that you found Austin, that you had your children, that you got to live a full and beautiful life. That is all I ever wanted for you. Will I see you again? Someday when your time comes, but not for a long time yet. You have grandchildren to spoil and more years to spend with Austin and so much life still to live. Do not rush toward me. Stay where you are and be happy." Willa woke with tears on her face but a smile on her lips. It had just been a dream, but it felt like more than that. It felt like closure, like a final blessing, like permission to fully embrace the life she had been given without reservation or guilt. The years that followed were gentle ones, filled with the quiet joys of aging together. Willa and Austin gradually handed over more of the ranch work to their children, though they never stopped contributing completely. They were content to take on lighter tasks, to offer advice when asked, to spoil their grandchildren with stories and treats. Willa continued to tend her garden, though on a smaller scale, growing vegetables and flowers that she shared with neighbors and family. She took up quilting and created beautiful pieces that became treasured heirlooms. She wrote down all the stories about Margot and her parents, about the early days with Austin, creating a family history that future generations could learn from. Austin worked with the horses until his body simply would not allow it anymore, then contented himself with sitting on the porch and watching others do the work he had once done himself. He carved small figures from wood, giving them to his grandchildren as gifts. He played checkers with anyone willing to take him on. He spent hours just sitting with Willa, comfortable in companionship that needed no words. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, then their 45th. Their children threw them a big party for their 50th, inviting half the territory it seemed. Willa looked around at the crowd of well-wishers, at the testament to the community they had helped build, and the lives they had touched, and felt complete. "We did good," she told Austin as they danced slowly to music played by Thomas's oldest boy, who had a gift for the fiddle. "Despite everything that tried to break us, we did good." "Better than good," Austin replied, holding her close even though his joints ached and his balance was not what it used to be. "We did extraordinary." Austin passed first, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. Willa woke one morning to find him cold beside her, his face relaxed and peaceful, and though grief washed over her like a wave, there was acceptance too. They had been blessed with 5 decades together, had built a life and family that would endure beyond them. That was more than most people got. She held his funeral at the church in Paradise, and it seemed like the entire territory came to pay their respects. Austin had been respected and liked, known for his fairness and kindness. Person after person shared stories about how he had helped them, offered advice, extended grace when it was needed. Willa listened to them all and felt proud of the man she had married, grateful for every moment they had shared. After the funeral, she returned to the ranch that had been their home for over 50 years. It felt empty without Austin, but it was also full of his presence. She saw him everywhere, in the barn he had built, in the fences he had mended, in the trees he had planted. He was woven into the very fabric of the place, and that brought comfort. She lived for 3 more years after Austin's death, dying at the age of 76 of simple old age. Thomas was with her at the end, holding her hand the way she had held his so many times when he was young. Her last words were about Austin and Margot, about how she would see them soon, about how she was ready to go home. They buried Willa beside Austin on the rise overlooking the ranch, the same spot where she had scattered Margot's things decades earlier. The entire family gathered, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, 3 generations who existed because 2 broken people had found each other and chosen to heal together. Thomas stood at the graveside after everyone else had left, looking at the simple markers that bore his parents' names. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for showing us what love looks like. Thank you for teaching us that pain does not have to destroy us, that we can survive terrible things and still build beautiful lives. Thank you for choosing each other, for choosing us, for creating this family and this legacy. We will carry it forward. We will remember." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of desert flowers, and Thomas chose to interpret it as his mother's response. A final blessing, a last gesture of love, an assurance that the story did not end here but continued in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. Years later, Thomas's granddaughter would write a book about Willa and Austin, about the tragedy that brought them together and the love that sustained them through 5 decades of marriage. She would title it "Carrying Each Other," and it would become a local favorite, reprinted and shared throughout New Mexico and beyond. People would read it and be inspired by the story of 2 people who refused to let grief define them, who found healing in each other's arms, who built something lasting and true from the wreckage of their losses. But that was still in the future. For now, on that rise overlooking the ranch in Paradise, New Mexico territory, 2 graves stood side by side, marking the resting place of Willa Vernon Jameson and Austin Jameson. Husband and wife, partners in life and death. 2 people who had learned that guilt did not have to be carried alone, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that second chances were real and precious and worth fighting for. And if sometimes on quiet evenings, the current residents of the ranch thought they saw 2 figures sitting on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, well, that was nobody's business but their own. Some love stories do not end with death. Some love stories echo through generations, teaching the same lessons over and over. That we are stronger together than apart, that forgiveness is possible, that choosing life and joy in the face of tragedy is not weakness but the ultimate form of courage. Willa had arrived in Paradise carrying guilt she did not deserve, drowning under the weight of what she believed was her failure. Austin had offered to help carry that burden, had stood beside her until she was strong enough to set it down. Together, they had built a life that honored the past while embracing the future. Together, they had proven that broken people could heal, that love could flourish in soil fertilized by grief, that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale ending, but something real people could actually achieve with enough patience, grace, and determination. Their story lived on in the family they created, in the ranch that still bore the Jameson name, in the community they helped build. It lived on in every person who read about them and found hope in their journey. It lived on in the simple truth that had sustained them through everything. That we do not have to carry our burdens alone, that asking for help is not weakness but wisdom, that love, when it is real and true and deep, can overcome anything. The sun set over Paradise, New Mexico, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber and rose, the same colors that had witnessed the beginning of their love story so many years before. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Willa and Austin were together still, joined by Margot and Sarah and Emma and all the others they had loved and lost. The circle was complete. The story was finished. And it had ended exactly as it should. With love triumphant, with grace abundant, with happily ever after fully and truly earned.